Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I found a hidden Roblox server through the dark web. The game map was an exact replica of my neighborhood. You ever get into something stupid just because your friends dared you to? Yeah, same here. This all started with one of those you won't do it moments that spiraled into something way bigger than I could have ever imagined or wanted. So here's the thing, I'm a pretty average guy. I work a boring part-time job, spend too much money at Starbucks, and kill time gaming when I'm not scrolling mindlessly through TikTok. But about 2 weeks ago, my life took a turn into something straight out of a horror movie. It was a Friday night, and I was chilling at my friend Kyle's apartment. A couple of us were there, cracking open energy drinks and munching on leftover McDonald's fries from earlier. We just finished watching some cringy, deep web exploration video on YouTube. One of those over-the-top animated ones where some guy ends up getting hacked or stalked or something ridiculous. Kyle, being Kyle, said, "Yo, what if we actually checked out the deep web? Like, how hard could it be? People exaggerate that stuff." I laughed it off at first, but then Kyle pulled out his laptop. He was serious. He even had a Tor browser installed already. I told him he was nuts, but then Hannah, another friend of ours, piped up. "Why not? It's probably just a bunch of sketchy eBay listings and conspiracy forums. Let's check it out." Before I knew it, we were all sitting around the laptop, nervously laughing as Kyle clicked through shady onion links. Most of the sites were exactly what you'd expect. Old forums, terrible design, and sketchy marketplaces selling stuff like fake IDs and mystery boxes. It was gross, but honestly kind of boring after a while. That's when Kyle found the Game Hub. It was just a black page with one sentence: "Play the game you were never meant to find." Below that, there was a download button and nothing else. No description, no screenshots, no comments. Of course, Kyle downloaded it, because why wouldn't he? I remember joking, "Dude, if we get FBI agents busting through the door, I'm telling them this was all your idea." The file downloaded quickly, and when Kyle opened it, we saw it was a Roblox game file. I was immediately confused. "Wait, Roblox? Like, the game for kids?" I asked. Kyle shrugged. "Yeah, but people mod this stuff all the time. It's probably just some dumb horror map someone uploaded to scare noobs." Hannah smirked. "Let's see how scary it really is." Looking back, I wish we'd just deleted the file right then and there, but we didn't. Kyle launched Roblox and loaded the game, and that's when things started to get weird. The loading screen. The game had no official name. When it launched, it just said, "Welcome, player name." Except the player name wasn't Kyle's Roblox username. It was his real name. "Wait, how does it know my name?" Kyle said, half laughing, half freaked out. "That's probably just some code to pull it from my account info, right?" None of us were sure. I was already feeling uneasy, but curiosity got the better of me, and I told him to keep going. The game loaded into what looked like a basic map at first. Trees, grass, and some blocky houses. But as I looked closer, something about it felt off. "Wait a second," I said. leaning closer to the screen. That looks like your street, Kyle. He zoomed out, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't just Kyle's street. It was his entire neighborhood. Every house was in the exact same place, with the same shape, same roofs, even the same cracked driveway in front of his apartment building. It was uncanny. Dude, this is insane. How did someone recreate your neighborhood? Hannah asked, sounding a little spooked. Kyle was quiet for a moment, then mumbled, I mean, I've never streamed or uploaded anything showing my house. How the hell? The game had no objectives, no tutorial, no enemies, just a map. Kyle's neighborhood. We walked his avatar down the street, checking out all the familiar landmarks, the corner store, the playground, even the Starbucks on the main road. It was all there, blocky but unmistakable. And then we found Kyle's apartment, the first glitch. When Kyle entered the virtual version of his apartment, the screen flickered. Just once. For a second, I thought his laptop was overheating or something, but then we saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the apartment. It wasn't an NPC. It wasn't another player. It was hard to describe. It looked like a person, but its face was blurred out, like a censored photo. Its body twitched unnaturally, jerking slightly to one side every few seconds. None of us said a word. Kyle tried to move the avatar closer, but the figure didn't react. It just stood there, watching. Or at least, I think it was watching. It was hard to tell without a face. Turn it off, man, I finally said. This is freaking me out. Kyle hesitated, but nodded. He pressed escape to quit the game, but nothing happened. The screen stayed frozen on the figure in his apartment. Great, it's crashed, Kyle muttered, trying to close the program. That's when the screen flickered again, and new text appeared at the bottom of the screen. Are you sure you want to leave, Kyle? We all froze. No one said a word. Kyle's hand hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly. What the hell? He whispered. He didn't type anything, but the text changed again, as if it was responding to him. You can't leave. Not yet. The phone call. Kyle slammed the laptop shut, his face pale. Nope. That's enough for me. I'm done. We all laughed nervously, trying to shake off the tension. But honestly, none of us felt okay. I grabbed my jacket, ready to head home, but before I could leave, Kyle's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. All it said was, "You left too soon, Kyle. The game isn't over." We all stared at the screen in disbelief. Then Kyle's phone started ringing. The caller ID said, "No caller ID." He didn't want to answer, but Hannah snatched the phone and put it on speaker. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaking slightly. There was no response, just static. Then, faintly, we heard a distorted, robotic voice. "Come back. Finish the game." Kyle grabbed the phone and hung up immediately. "Okay, screw this. I'm calling the cops." But before he could, the power in his apartment cut out. Everything went black except for the dim glow of his laptop, which had somehow reopened itself. The figure in the game was gone, but the text on the screen had changed again. "You should have stayed, Kyle." The power didn't come back on for almost an hour. The only light in the apartment was the eerie glow of Kyle's laptop, which somehow stayed on despite everything else being dead. At first, we thought it might have been running on battery, but Kyle's face went pale when he whispered, "This thing, it doesn't even have a battery anymore. I took it out months ago." "What do you mean, you took it out?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. Kyle looked at us, visibly shaken. The laptop battery was messed up, so I just used the charger. It shouldn't even be on right now. We all exchanged uneasy glances. None of this made any sense. But what could we do? Call the cops and tell them a Roblox game was haunting us? Yeah, right. The search for answers. Once the power came back, Kyle did what most people would probably do in his situation. He Googled it. He searched everything from Roblox dark web game to haunted Roblox servers, but nothing came up that matched what we experienced. Sure, there were a few forums and Reddit threads talking about creepy maps or disturbing mods, but nothing even close to a server that somehow knew your name, your neighborhood, and, apparently, your entire life. We even checked Kyle's Roblox account to see if someone had hacked it or something, but when we logged in, the game wasn't there. It didn't show up in his library, his downloads, or even his recently played games. It was like it never existed. Maybe it's just some elaborate prank, I said, trying to sound calm. Like some super hacker messing with people for fun. Hannah shook her head. But how? How would they know his address or his real name? And what about that text and the phone call? None of us had an answer. That's when we made our second mistake. Loading the game. Again. I wish I could say we were smart enough to delete the file and move on with our lives, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. Kyle, despite his obvious fear, was itching to figure out what was going on. Look, he said, if this is some prank, or ARG, or whatever, we're not going to figure it out by sitting around and freaking out. I'm opening it again. Are you insane? Hannah snapped. Did you not see what just happened? But Kyle was already booting up the game. You don't have to stay if you don't want to, he said. But I'm not letting some creepy hacker mess with me and get away with it. Reluctantly, Hannah and I stayed. We weren't about to leave Kyle alone with this thing, no matter how stupid it was. When the game loaded, the map was the same as before. Kyle's neighborhood, perfectly recreated in its unsettling, blocky detail. Except this time, it wasn't empty. The players. There were people in the game now, or at least they looked like people. Their avatars were basic Roblox characters, featureless with no faces or distinguishing features, but they were scattered throughout the map, standing in unnatural, stiff poses. Who are they? I asked. Kyle moved his avatar closer to one of the figures. It didn't move or react, but when he got close enough, a chat bubble appeared above its head. It read, "Help me." I felt a chill run down my spine. Kyle moved to another figure. Same thing. "Help me." He approached a third, and this time, the message was different. "He's watching." "Who's watching?" Kyle muttered under his breath. That's when we heard it. A sound coming from the game. It was faint at first, like static, but it grew louder as Kyle's avatar moved deeper into the map. It wasn't just noise. It was breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, like someone was standing right behind us. The replica house. Kyle kept moving, his hands trembling on the keyboard. Eventually, he reached his own apartment in the game again. The door was wide open this time. Inside, everything was exactly the same as before, down to the smallest detail. The furniture, the layout, even the poster on his bedroom wall. It was all there, but the figure from earlier, the one with the blurred face, was gone. Kyle hesitated, then moved his avatar to his bedroom. That's when we saw it. On the bed in the game was a body, a blocky, pixelated body, but it was unmistakably a human shape. It was lying face down, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Blood, if you can call it that in Roblox, was splattered across the walls and floor in jagged, pixelated streaks. A chat bubble appeared above the body. "You're next." Kyle slammed his laptop shut again, breathing heavily. "Nope. Nope. Nope." The real-life visitor. We were all freaked out, but what happened next is what truly broke us. As we were sitting there, trying to process what we'd just seen, there was a knock at the door. A slow, deliberate knock. "Kyle," I whispered, "did you order food or something?" He shook his head, looking just as confused and terrified as I felt. No one moved. The knock came again, louder this time. Kyle finally stood up, grabbing a kitchen knife on his way to the door. He peeked through the peephole and froze. "There's no one there," he said, his voice shaking. "Then who's knocking?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the knocking started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from inside Kyle's apartment, from his bedroom. The bedroom intruder. Kyle didn't wait. He charged into his bedroom, knife in hand, with us close behind. But the room was empty. There was no one there, no sign of anyone having been there. The windows were locked. The closet was empty. And yet, written on the wall, in what looked like smeared red paint, were the words, "Finish the game." We all stared at it in horror. "This isn't happening," Hannah said, tears welling up in her eyes. "This can't be real." But it was. And it got worse. The final message. Kyle's laptop, which had been closed and sitting on the coffee table, turned on by itself. The Roblox game was open again. The figure with the blurred face was back, standing in the middle of the screen, staring directly at the camera. Then, in the chat, a new message appeared. "You can't run, Kyle. You can't hide." The screen flickered, and for a split second, we saw an image flash on the screen. It wasn't the game anymore. It was a photo. A real photo of us, sitting in Kyle's apartment. I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Seeing that photo of the three of us sitting right there in Kyle's apartment broke something in me. It wasn't just a game anymore. This was real, and whoever was behind it was watching us. From where? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. Kyle slammed the laptop shut again, but this time he yanked the power cord out of the wall and shoved the entire thing off the coffee table. It hit the floor with a loud crack, but even then, I couldn't help but feel like it wasn't enough. Like the damn thing would turn itself back on any second. "We need to leave," Hannah said, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." "And go where?" Kyle shot back. "What if they're watching us outside too? What if they're already out there?" The words hung in the air like a death sentence. None of us knew what to say. Every noise in the apartment felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even the faint ticking of the wall clock. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. It felt like the walls were closing in. That's when I noticed something. The hidden camera. The photo. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The angle wasn't right. It wasn't taken from outside the window, or even from the door. It was taken from inside the apartment. "Kyle," I said, swallowing hard. "Where's your router?" He blinked at me, confused. "What? Why? Just, where is it?" He pointed to the corner of the room, where a small router sat on top of a bookshelf. I walked over to it, my hands trembling, and looked closely. That's when I saw it. A tiny black dot on the side of the router. It was almost invisible, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. It was a camera. "Oh my God," I whispered, They're in here. They've been in here this whole time. Hannah let out a small gasp, and Kyle immediately grabbed the router, yanking it off the shelf. He turned it over in his hands, his face a mix of rage and terror. "How the hell did this get here?" he demanded. "I didn't put this here." "Whoever sent you that game," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They've been watching you for a while. This wasn't random." Kyle didn't hesitate. He slammed the router against the wall as hard as he could, over and over, until it was nothing but a shattered mess of plastic and wires. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. What if there were more cameras? What if they were in the vents, the light fixtures, the TV? Hannah started sobbing. "This is insane. This is psychotic. What do they want from us?" I didn't have an answer. None of us did. The disappearing neighbors, we decided to leave. Staying in Kyle's apartment felt like a death trap, so we grabbed our things and headed for the door. But as soon as we stepped outside, the unease grew worse. It was dead silent. Kyle's building is usually lively, even late at night. People coming and going, cars driving by, dogs barking. But now, nothing. No lights in the neighboring windows, no sound of distant traffic. It was like the entire world had been put on pause. "Where is everyone?" Hannah whispered, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Kyle looked around, his jaw clenched. "Maybe they're asleep." But it didn't feel like that. It felt wrong, like the kind of silence you hear in a funeral home. We walked to the parking lot, our footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. When we got to Kyle's car, he stopped dead in his tracks. "What the?" All 4 of his tires were slashed. Not just slashed, but shredded, like someone had taken a knife to them, over and over again. The windshield was covered in deep scratches, spelling out 2 chilling words: no escape. The stranger on the sidewalk. "Okay, screw this," I said, my voice cracking. "We need to call the cops. Right now." Hannah was already dialing on her phone, her hands trembling so badly that she could barely hold it steady. But when she pressed the call button, nothing happened. No ringing, no dial tone, nothing. "What's wrong?" Kyle asked. She stared at the screen, her face pale. "There's no service." I pulled out my own phone, and sure enough, the signal was completely gone. No bars, no Wi-Fi, nothing. It didn't make any sense. We were in the middle of the city. How could we have no service? That's when we saw him. A man was standing at the end of the sidewalk, just barely visible under the dim glow of a street lamp. He was wearing a black hoodie, the hood pulled up, so we couldn't see his face. He wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, facing us. "Who the hell is that?" Kyle muttered. "Don't," I said, grabbing his arm as he started to take a step forward. "Don't go near him." The man tilted his head slightly, like he was studying us. Then he raised his hand and pointed directly at Kyle. Kyle froze. "What? What does he want?" The man didn't answer. He just stood there, pointing, his face still hidden in shadow. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand and reached into his pocket. "Run," I whispered. "Run now." The chase we bolted. Kyle grabbed Hannah's hand, and I sprinted ahead, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. We didn't stop to look back. We didn't need to. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind us. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, getting closer and closer. We ran down the street, past the playground, past the Starbucks, past all the familiar landmarks that now felt alien and terrifying. Every window we passed was dark. Every door was locked. It was like the entire neighborhood had been abandoned. Where are we going? Hannah screamed. I don't know, Kyle shouted back. Just keep running. Eventually we ducked into an alleyway, crouching behind a dumpster to catch our breath. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, all we could hear was the sound of our own ragged breathing. Do you think we lost him? Hannah whispered. I don't know, Kyle said. I don't... He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. The man was standing at the end of the alley, completely still, his hood still covering his face. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, more figures began to emerge from the shadows, each one wearing the same black hoodie, each one moving in the same unnatural, jerky way as the blurred figure from the game. The message in blood. We didn't have time to think. We ran again, weaving through the maze of alleyways, the sound of their footsteps echoing all around us. It didn't make sense. They were everywhere. No matter which way we turned, they always seemed to be one step ahead. Finally, we burst out onto the main road, panting and gasping for air. The first thing I noticed was the car, a black SUV, parked across the street with its headlights off. The windows were tinted, but I could feel eyes on us, watching. On the side of the SUV, written in what looked like smeared blood, were the words, "Finish the game." The end game. Kyle looked at me, his face pale and drenched in sweat. This isn't going to stop, is it? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whoever or whatever was behind this wasn't playing around. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a game. This was something much worse. And the worst part? Deep down, I knew Kyle was right. It wasn't going to stop. Not until we finished what we started. We didn't go back to Kyle's apartment. How could we? The thought of stepping inside that place again made my skin crawl. Instead, we ended up at an all-night diner a few blocks away, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and sticky plastic booths. It was the only place that felt even remotely safe, bright, crowded, with a constant hum of people and noise. For the first time in hours, we felt like we weren't completely alone. But even there, the feeling didn't go away. That sinking, crawling feeling at the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. The waitress came by, pouring us coffee we didn't ask for. I could barely lift the mug. My hands were shaking too badly. Kyle just stared at his phone, which was still dead, the black screen like a void staring back at him. Hannah wasn't doing much better. She kept glancing out the window, like she was expecting one of those hooded figures to show up in the parking lot. They knew, she said finally, breaking the silence. They knew we'd come here. What are you talking about? Kyle asked, his voice flat and dead, like he didn't even have the energy to argue. Hannah leaned forward, lowering her voice. The game. It knew where we were. It knew your neighborhood, your house. It's not just watching us. It's predicting us. What if it knows we're here right now? I felt a chill creep down my spine. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that this was just some elaborate prank gone too far, but I couldn't, because deep down, I was starting to believe her. The bloody note. We didn't realize it at first. The waitress came back with our food, 3 plates of greasy fries and burgers none of us were hungry for, and as she set them down, she slipped a folded piece of paper onto the table. At first, I thought it was the bill, but when I unfolded it, my stomach dropped. In large, smeared letters, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "You're wasting time." I shoved the paper across the table to Kyle. "What the hell is this?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. Kyle's face turned white as he read it. He grabbed the waitress by the arm as she walked by. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "The note? You left it here, didn't you?" "Do we look like we left this here?" I snapped, holding it up. She frowned and glanced at the paper, but when she saw what was written, her face went blank. I didn't see anyone leave it," she stammered, backing away. "I just thought it was yours." Before we could press her further, the lights in the diner flickered. Just once, but it was enough to send my heart racing again. Hannah grabbed her phone, desperately trying to get a signal, but still, there was nothing. No bars, no Wi-Fi, nothing but the endless, mocking emptiness of that dead screen. "We can't keep running," Kyle said suddenly. "If this thing wants us to play, then maybe we have to play." "Are you hearing yourself?" Hannah shot back. "That's exactly what they want. Don't you get it? They're trying to lure us in." "And what's your plan, huh?" Kyle snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Sit here and wait for them to come finish us off, because that's what's going to happen if we don't do something." The return to the game. Against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I agreed. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't see another way out. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this wasn't going to let us go. The only way to end this was to finish the game. We left the diner and went back to my place this time. It was closer than Hannah's, and Kyle's apartment was out of the question. Every step we took through the dark streets felt like walking into a trap. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the hooded figures again, or the man in the black SUV. But the streets were empty. Too empty. Once we were inside, Kyle set up the laptop on my kitchen table. It was still dented from when he'd slammed it on the floor earlier, but somehow it still worked. The moment he opened it, the game launched by itself. No login screen, no menu, just the map, just his neighborhood. Except this time, it wasn't just his neighborhood. Our lives in blocks. The map was bigger now, much bigger. As Kyle moved the avatar around, we started to recognize more than just his street. There was the diner we'd just been at, down to the flickering neon sign. My apartment building was there too, with the same chipped paint and broken railing on the stairs. Even Hannah's place, though we hadn't been anywhere near it tonight. It was all there, perfectly recreated. "This is insane," I muttered. "How do they know all this?" Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not just watching us, it's following us." Kyle kept moving the avatar, and that's when we saw them, the hooded figures. They were everywhere, standing on street corners, in doorways, even inside the virtual versions of our homes. Their heads twitched unnaturally, snapping from side to side like broken marionettes. And then, for the first time, the game spoke. The voice. It wasn't text on the screen this time. It was a voice, distorted and robotic, like someone had fed their speech through a dozen different filters. It came through the laptop speakers, low and crackling, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "You can't run," it said. "You can't hide." Kyle froze, his hand hovering over the keyboard. "What do you want from us?" he shouted at the screen. The voice didn't answer right away. Instead, the screen flickered and the camera shifted. It was no longer showing the game map. It was showing us, the three of us, sitting at the kitchen table. "We want to finish what we started," the voice said. "But first, a choice." The screen split in two. On one side was an image of Kyle's face, pale and sweating, his eyes wide with fear. On the other side was an image of Hannah, tears streaming down her cheeks. Below each image was a simple word: Sacrifice. The timer. A timer appeared at the bottom of the screen, counting down from 60 seconds. None of us moved. None of us spoke. The room was so silent, I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. "What the hell is this?" Hannah whispered. Kyle stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm not playing this game," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm not choosing." The timer kept ticking down. 45 seconds. 30 seconds. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. What would happen when it hit 0? Did we even want to find out? "Kyle," I said, my voice shaking. "What if?" "I'm not choosing," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "They can't make me choose." The voice crackled through the speakers again, calm and mocking. "If you don't choose, we will." The sacrifice. The timer hit 0. The screen went black for a moment, and then the game reloaded. The map was still there, but this time, something was different. The hooded figures were gone. The streets were empty again, except for one thing. There was a new figure standing in the middle of the map. It wasn't blurred like the others. It wasn't hooded. It was Hannah. Her avatar stood perfectly still, staring at the camera with wide, empty eyes. "What the?" Carl whispered, his voice barely audible. The screen flickered, and text appeared above her avatar's head. "The choice has been made." And then, right in front of us, her avatar collapsed. Blood, realistic, too realistic for Roblox, poured out of the blocky figure, staining the ground. The screen flickered again, and we saw Hannah's body. Not in the game, in real life. She was slumped over the table, her head resting in a growing pool of blood. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't feel real. 1 second, Hannah had been sitting there, alive, shaking and terrified, just like the rest of us. And the next, she was gone. Blood pooled across the table, dripping down the sides and splattering onto the floor. Her face was slack, her eyes wide open but empty, like the life had been ripped out of her all at once. Carl screamed, not a normal scream, a raw, guttural noise that tore from his throat like an animal in pain. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her like he could somehow snap her back into reality. But her body just slumped forward, lifeless. I stumbled back from the table, my legs shaking so badly that I nearly collapsed. My brain couldn't catch up with what had just happened. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. This was some kind of nightmare, some hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. But the blood was real. The smell of it hit me like a slap in the face, metallic and sharp, filling the room like a sickening fog. The laptop screen was still on, glowing brightly in the darkness. On the screen, Hannah's pixelated body lay crumpled on the blocky street, surrounded by a growing pool of fake blood. The text above her avatar flashed again. "The choice has been made. Are you ready to finish the game?" The game takes control. Kyle staggered back, his hands covered in Hannah's blood. His breathing was erratic, wild, like he was on the verge of hyperventilating. "We have to stop this," he whispered. "We have to end it now." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My body felt frozen, like if I moved or spoke, the whole world would come crashing down around me. I watched as Kyle turned back to the laptop, his shaking hands hovering over the keyboard. "What do you want from us?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You've already taken her. What else do you want?" The screen flickered again. The game's map zoomed out, showing not just Kyle's neighborhood, or the diner, or my apartment, but the entire city. Every street, every building, perfectly replicated in the blocky, unsettling style of the game. And in the center of the map, glowing red, was a single building, my apartment. Text appeared on the screen again, cold and mechanical. The final level has begun. Come home. A dangerous return. I didn't want to go back. I couldn't. But what choice did we have? Every instinct I had was screaming at me to grab Kyle and run, to get as far away as possible and never look back. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, it wouldn't stop. It wouldn't let us go. Not unless we played by its rules. We left Hannah's body where it was. I couldn't even bring myself to cover her. The thought of touching her, of seeing her blank, lifeless face again, made me feel like I was going to throw up. I told myself we'd come back for her when this was over, if we made it through. But deep down, I wasn't sure we'd ever be coming back. The streets were empty as we walked to my apartment. Not just quiet, completely deserted. No cars, no people, no signs of life at all. It felt like we were the only ones left in the world. Even the air felt heavy, oppressive, like we were being watched from every shadow. As we approached my building, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The windows. Every single one of them was blacked out, like the entire building had been swallowed by darkness. And on the front door, painted in thick red letters, were the words, "Welcome home." Inside the final level, the moment we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us. Kyle spun around, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he said, panic rising in his voice. "We're trapped." The lobby was completely dark, except for a faint red glow coming from the stairwell. It pulsed like a heartbeat, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the walls. I didn't want to go up there. Everything in me was screaming to turn around, to find another way out. But there was no other way. The game had made sure of that. We started climbing the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the silence. The red glow grew brighter the higher we went, and the air grew heavier, thicker, like we were descending into some kind of hell instead of climbing upward. My legs felt like lead, every step harder than the last. When we reached my floor, the hallway was bathed in that same pulsing red light. The walls were covered in more writing, scrawled in what looked like blood. "It's your turn now." At the end of the hallway, my apartment door was wide open, the final confrontation. We stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was overwhelming, a sickly mix of decay and iron that hit me like a punch to the gut. The red light was coming from the laptop, sitting on my kitchen table, the same one we'd brought from Kyle's place, except it wasn't dented anymore. It looked brand new. On the screen was my face, not my avatar, my actual face. I was staring at the camera, wide-eyed and terrified, just as I was now. Below my image, the text read, "Are you ready to play?" Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind us. Kyle screamed, spinning around to try and open it, but it was no use. The walls began to shake, the red light flickering wildly, and the voice returned, louder and more distorted than ever. "One must remain. The game must be fed." Kyle turned to me, his eyes wide with panic. "What does that mean? What the hell does that mean?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The laptop screen changed again, showing the two of us standing in the apartment side by side. And below us, two options appeared. Sacrifice yourself. Sacrifice him. A new timer appeared, counting down from 60 seconds. The breaking point. "No," Kyle said, shaking his head violently. "No, I'm not doing this. I'm not playing their game. The timer kept ticking down. 45 seconds. 30 seconds. The voice spoke again, cold and mocking. If you don't choose, we will. Kyle looked at me, his face twisted in terror and desperation. We can figure this out, he said. We don't have to play. We just... I didn't let him finish. I grabbed the nearest object, a glass from the counter, and smashed it across his face. He stumbled back, screaming, blood streaming down his cheek. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I tackled him to the ground, pinning him with all my weight, and grabbed a shard of broken glass from the floor. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry. Before he could fight back, I drove the shard into his chest. Once, twice, over and over until he stopped moving. The game ends. The room went silent. The red light faded, replaced by the dull yellow glow of my kitchen bulb. The laptop screen went black, then displayed a single message. Thank you for playing. I collapsed onto the floor, covered in Kyle's blood, shaking so hard I thought I might fall apart. The door unlocked with a soft click. Outside, the sounds of the city returned. Cars, voices, life. It was like nothing had ever happened, but it did, and I'll never forget it. The aftermath. It's been 3 days since that night. Hannah and Kyle's bodies are still missing. The police questioned me, of course, but they couldn't find any evidence. No blood, no laptop, nothing. It was like the game wiped itself from existence, leaving me as the sole survivor of something I can't even begin to explain. I don't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, and every time I check my phone, I can't help but feel like the game is still out there, waiting for me to play again. Because sometimes, late at night, I hear it, the faint sound of footsteps, and a voice whispering, "Your turn isn't over." I was paid $15,000 on the dark web to test a holiday VR experience. The Santa in the simulation knows too much about me. So, this happened about 2 weeks ago, and I still don't know if I should tell someone or just leave it alone. Honestly, the more I think about it, the worse it gets. But I need to get this off my chest before it drives me insane. I was scrolling through Reddit late one night, as you do, bouncing between RR Ask Reddit and RR Mildly Interesting, when I stumbled across a comment thread about the weirdest things people had done for money. You know, babysitting for creepy rich people, testing experimental products, stuff like that. And someone casually dropped a reply saying they got paid to test VR experiences they found on the dark web. Now, I'm not an idiot. I've heard the horror stories about the dark web, human trafficking, hitmen, illegal markets. That stuff is terrifying, but part of me was intrigued. Like, why would someone risk getting involved with that? And if it's just testing VR, how bad could it really be? Curiosity got the best of me, and I started researching. I didn't dive in too deep at first, just Googled dark web VR testing, like a normal person. Nothing came up. Shocker. So I figured it was just another internet myth, until 2 days later when I got an email. The subject line was simple. VR tester needed, $15,000 payment. It wasn't spam or one of those scam emails from a Nigerian prince. This looked legit. The sender used a domain I'd never heard of before, something like privateexperience.com, and the message was short. It said they were looking for someone to test an immersive holiday VR experience and were willing to pay $15,000 for just 1 hour of feedback. The email even included a terms and conditions PDF, like it was some corporate gig. At first, I ignored it. I mean, it sounded shady as hell. But $15,000. I could wipe out my student loans, cover rent for a few months, maybe even take a break from my soul-sucking customer service job. The more I thought about it, the more tempting it became. I mean, it was just VR, right? No one gets hurt in a video game. They didn't ask for much, just a first name, email confirmation, and my availability. No SSN, no credit card details, and I knew enough to use a throwaway email account. After about a day of debating with myself, I replied. The next email came almost immediately. They gave me a date, a time, and an address. A small studio in the middle of the city, not far from a Starbucks I go to all the time. It was in a normal office building, not some sketchy warehouse like you'd expect. I googled the address, and it seemed legit. No red flags, just a small company I couldn't find much info about. I figured, worst case scenario, I'd just walk out if something seemed off. The night before, I told my best friend Rachel about it. She's the kind of person who always thinks the worst is going to happen, but even she admitted it didn't sound like that big of a deal. Her exact words were, "Just don't get kidnapped, okay? Text me when you're done." Classic Rachel. So, I went. The studio was exactly where they said it would be. 5th floor, suite 502. The receptionist, a woman in her late 30s with a generic business casual look, greeted me like she'd been expecting me. She handed me a clipboard with a thick NDA to sign and didn't ask too many questions, just my name and confirmation that I'd brought ID. I didn't, by the way. I wasn't that stupid. The testing room looked normal. There was a sleek VR headset set up in the middle of the room, with wires running into a computer I couldn't even begin to describe. The walls were white and bare, and the only other thing in the room was a large mirror on one side, which I assumed was a two-way window. You know, typical corporate testing vibes. The receptionist handed me a bottle of water and told me the experience would last exactly 60 minutes. Afterward, I'd receive my payment through a digital transfer. Easy. Before I put on the headset, I asked her what the holiday experience was about. She smiled, a weird, tight-lipped smile, and said, "It's designed to recreate the perfect Christmas memory." Weird answer, but whatever. I put the headset on, and the world around me vanished. At first, it was beautiful. The simulation dropped me into what looked like a perfect snowy town square, straight out of a Hallmark movie. Twinkling lights, fake snowflakes falling from the sky, and cheerful Christmas music playing in the background. I could see a Starbucks across the street, and a Macy's lit up with holiday displays. It was eerily realistic. Like, if you told me this was a real place, I'd believe you. A deep voice greeted me. "Welcome to your holiday experience. Let's begin." I turned around, and there he was, Santa Claus. Not the jolly, cartoonish version, but a more authentic take. His suit looked slightly worn, like he'd actually been wearing it all season, and his eyes were sharp and focused. Too focused. "Tell me about your favorite Christmas," Santa said. I laughed, assuming this was part of the script. I don't really have one," I replied. "My family isn't big on Christmas." The scene shifted instantly. The square was gone. Now, I was standing in a small living room I didn't recognize, decorated with cheap tinsel and a plastic tree. There was a faint smell of burnt cookies in the air. A younger version of me, probably 7 or 8, was sitting on the floor, unwrapping a gift. I could hear my mom's voice in the background, yelling at my dad about something. "Is this your favorite Christmas?" Santa asked. My stomach dropped. How could the simulation recreate this? I hadn't told anyone about that Christmas. It wasn't even a good memory. Just some random year where my parents tried to fake being happy for my sake. No, I stammered. This isn't right. The scene shifted again. This time, it was my college dorm room. My roommate had strung up dollar store fairy lights, and we were sitting on the floor, drinking spiked eggnog and watching Home Alone. That was a good Christmas, but I hadn't thought about it in years. "Is this your favorite Christmas?" Santa repeated. I was starting to feel uneasy. "I don't know," I said. "Can we move on?" Santa's smile faded slightly. "Not until we find it." And that's when the simulation started to get weird. The next scene wasn't a memory. At least it shouldn't have been. I was in a McDonald's parking lot, sitting in the driver's seat of my old car. It was dark, and the only light came from the glowing arches of the drive-through sign. My phone was buzzing on the passenger seat, and when I glanced at the screen, I froze. It was Rachel calling me. But this wasn't a memory. This was happening right now. "Pick it up," Santa said, his voice deeper and more commanding. I hesitated. How is this possible?" "Pick it up," he repeated. When I didn't move, the phone answered itself. Rachel's voice came through the speakers, frantic and scared. "Are you okay? You didn't text me. Where are you? I think someone's following me." The line went dead, and then everything went black. When the world went black, I thought the simulation had ended. You know, like maybe the system had glitched or crashed. But then I realized I could still hear the faint sound of Rachel's voice echoing in my ears. It was distant, distorted, like a bad audio file being played on loop. I tried to take the headset off, but my hands didn't move. Actually, my whole body felt like it was frozen, like I was stuck in sleep paralysis. And then, as quickly as the darkness had come, it faded, and I found myself in a completely different place. I was standing in the middle of a forest. It was nighttime, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. The snow was gone, and so was the cheerful holiday atmosphere. The air was heavy and cold, and everything felt wrong. The kind of wrong that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Ahead of me was a small cabin. It looked abandoned, the kind of place you'd see in a true crime documentary where someone went missing. The windows were cracked, the door hung slightly open, and there was an old, rusty axe buried in a tree stump outside. "Why are we here?" I said out loud, but there was no response. Santa was gone. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to the cabin. Maybe it was the only thing that stood out in the endless sea of trees, or maybe the simulation was guiding me there. Either way, my feet started moving before I could stop them. The crunch of leaves and twigs under my boots echoed in the silence, and the closer I got to the cabin, the more I felt like I was being watched. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. There was something smeared on the wood, something dark and dried. Blood. At least it looked like blood. I told myself it was just part of the experience, some twisted attempt at making things immersive. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me immediately. Rotting meat, metallic, sour, and nauseating. The inside of the cabin was worse than the outside. Dark, cramped, and cluttered with junk. There were broken chairs, a table that looked like it had been flipped over in a fight, and something in the corner covered by a dirty sheet. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. I don't know why I said anything. I didn't expect anyone to answer, and honestly, I was praying they wouldn't. And then I heard it. Faint breathing, coming from underneath the sheet. I froze. My brain screamed at me to turn around and leave, but my body wouldn't listen. Slowly, like I was being controlled by someone else, I walked toward the corner. My hands reached out, trembling, and I grabbed the edge of the sheet. "Don't!" I whispered to myself, but it was too late. I yanked the sheet back, and for a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was a person, or what was left of one. Their face was unrecognizable, mangled beyond belief, like someone had taken a hammer to their skull. Their limbs were bent at unnatural angles, and their clothes were soaked in blood. But the worst part? Their eyes. They were wide open, staring straight at me, and there was something about them that felt alive. Suddenly, the corpse twitched. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The body didn't move again, but the breathing sound got louder, closer, until I realized it wasn't coming from the body at all. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, and there he was. Santa, but not the same Santa I'd seen in the town square. This version was taller, thinner, and his face. Oh God, his face. The beard was gone, replaced by raw, blistered skin that looked like it had been peeled off and stapled back on. His eyes were hollow, black pits, and his mouth was twisted into a smile that stretched way too far, like his jaw had been unhinged. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice deep and guttural. I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing the air out of my lungs. Santa took a step toward me, and I noticed he was holding something in his hand. A candy cane, but it wasn't the kind you hang on a Christmas tree. It was jagged, broken at one end, and dripping with something dark. "Do you want to see your favorite Christmas now?" he asked, tilting his head. I shook my head, backing away until I hit the wall. "This isn't real," I managed to choke out. "It's just a simulation." Santa laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "Is it?" he said. "You should ask Rachel." At the mention of her name, my blood ran cold. "What did you do to her?" I shouted. Instead of answering, he raised the candy cane and pointed it at the corpse in the corner. My heart dropped. I stumbled toward the body, praying it wasn't true, but as I got closer, the details became clearer. The hoodie, the necklace, the tattoo on the wrist. It was Rachel. "No, no, no," I muttered, shaking my head. "This isn't real. It can't be real." Santa stepped closer, his smile widening. "You brought her here," he said. "She tried to save you, but you didn't pick up the phone. You left her out there, alone." Tears blurred my vision as I reached out to touch her, but the second my hand made contact, everything changed. The cabin, the forest, even Santa, they all vanished. I was back in the testing room, sitting in the chair, the headset still on my face. I ripped it off and gasped for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The receptionist was standing in the corner, watching me with a blank expression. "Congratulations," she said. "The test is complete." "What the hell was that?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What did you do to me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me an envelope. I opened it, and inside was a single piece of paper with an address scrawled on it in red ink. No explanation, no payment, just the address. "What is this?" I demanded. The receptionist smiled, and for a moment her face flickered. just like Santa's had in the simulation. "Your next Christmas memory," she said. I didn't wait to find out what she meant. I bolted out of the building, my mind racing. But as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. "I think someone's following me. Are you okay? Where are you?" I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. The message was word for word what I'd heard in the simulation. But Rachel was supposed to be dead. I'd seen her body. I'd touched it. My phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a picture. A selfie of Rachel, smiling nervously, standing in front of the same cabin I'd just been inside. Below the picture was a single message: "Come find me." I don't know how long I stood outside that building, staring at my phone. My mind was running in circles, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. There was no way Rachel could have sent that text. She was dead, or at least she should have been. I'd seen her mangled body in the simulation. That kind of thing doesn't just unhappen, but the text was there. The picture was real, and the cabin in the background, it was exactly the same as the one I'd just seen, down to the rusty axe buried in the tree stump. My first thought was to call her. If she was alive, I needed to hear her voice. But when I tried dialing her number, it went straight to voicemail. My heart sank, but I told myself it could have just been bad reception or her phone dying. She texted me, after all. That had to mean she was okay, right? I looked down at the piece of paper the receptionist had handed me. The address was somewhere out of town, about an hour's drive away. It wasn't familiar, but that didn't mean much. I wasn't exactly great with directions. I plugged it into Google Maps, half expecting it to lead me to nowhere. But the route popped up instantly. The cabin was real. It existed. I should have just gone home. I should have deleted the text, blocked the number, and pretended none of this ever happened. But I couldn't. If there was even the slightest chance Rachel was alive, I had to find her. The drive was brutal, not because of traffic or bad weather, but because of the gnawing feeling in my gut that I was making a huge mistake. The further I got from the city, the darker and emptier the roads became. Streetlights disappeared, and the GPS led me down a narrow, winding road that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Overgrown trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. As I got closer to the address, the uneasy feeling in my stomach turned into full-blown dread. It felt like the air was getting heavier, like the world was pressing down on me, warning me to turn back. But I kept going. Finally, the cabin came into view. It looked exactly the same as it had in the simulation, dark, decrepit, and utterly uninviting. The rusty axe was still there, stuck in the same tree stump. The front door was slightly ajar, just like before. My phone buzzed, startling me. I glanced at the screen and saw another text from Rachel. "Come inside. Hurry." My hands were shaking as I typed back, "Where are you? Are you okay?" But there was no response, just silence. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and biting, but I barely noticed. My heart was pounding too hard, my thoughts racing too fast. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't, not until I knew the truth. The inside of the cabin was worse than I remembered. It wasn't just dirty, it was wrong. The air smelled thick and metallic, like blood and something rotting. The furniture was covered in dust, and the walls were lined with deep scratches, as if someone or something had been clawing at them. "Rachel!" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I moved further inside, shining my flashlight around the room. There was no sign of her, or anyone for that matter. But as I stepped deeper into the cabin, I noticed something strange. The layout was different. The room seemed bigger, the walls farther apart. I could have sworn this place had been smaller in the simulation. It was like the space itself was shifting, changing. Then I saw it, the sheet in the corner. My blood turned to ice. It was the same sheet I'd pulled back in the simulation, the same one that had covered Rachel's body. But this time, there was no corpse underneath it, just a small, folded piece of paper. I hesitated, every fiber of my being telling me not to touch it. But curiosity won out. I reached down, my hands trembling, and unfolded the paper. The game isn't over. Check the basement. Basement. There hadn't been a basement in the simulation, at least not one I'd seen. I shone my flashlight around the room, and that's when I noticed the trapdoor. It was partially hidden beneath a dirty rug, the edges barely visible. I took a step toward it, my breath coming in short, shaky gasps. The trapdoor looked old, the wood splintered and cracked. I could feel something emanating from it. Something dark, something alive. It wasn't just a basement. It was wrong. But I had to know. If Rachel was down there, I couldn't leave her. I grabbed the metal handle and pulled. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into pitch blackness. The air that rushed out was freezing, damp, and suffocating. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but I could make out the steps leading down into the abyss. The basement was colder than the cabin, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. My flashlight flickered as I descended, and I prayed it wouldn't go out. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing loudly in the silence. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a small concrete room. The walls were damp and covered in strange markings, symbols I didn't recognize, etched deep into the stone. Chains hung from the ceiling, and in the center of the room was an old wooden table. Something was lying on it, covered by another sheet. My stomach churned. I didn't want to look, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I stepped closer, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and pulled the sheet back. It wasn't Rachel. It was a man, middle-aged, balding, and dressed in a business suit. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and his chest had been carved open. His ribs were splayed out like wings, exposing his organs. Blood pooled beneath the table, dripping onto the floor. But the most disturbing part was his face. His mouth had been stretched into a grotesque smile, his lips sewn together with thick black thread. I stumbled back, gagging, and nearly dropped my flashlight. That's when I heard it, a soft, wet sound coming from the corner of the room, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. "Rachel?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The sound stopped. Slowly, I turned the flashlight toward the corner. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows and darkness. But then, something moved. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and my heart stopped. It was Rachel, or at least it looked like her. But there was something wrong. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were empty, lifeless. She was smiling, the same grotesque, unnatural smile as the man on the table. "You found me," she said, her voice soft and distorted. "Rachel," I stammered, tears streaming down my face. "What happened to you? What is this?" She tilted her head, her smile widening. "You shouldn't have come here." Before I could respond, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, and getting closer. And then, just before the darkness swallowed me completely, I heard her whisper, "You're next." When the lights went out, everything felt like it stopped. No sound, no movement. Just me standing there in total darkness, my breath ragged and shallow. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing through the room. I fumbled with the flashlight, slapping it in desperation, praying it would turn back on. It did, but I almost wished it hadn't. Rachel, or whatever this thing pretending to be Rachel was, stood less than a foot away from me. Her face was inches from mine, that grotesque smile stretched impossibly wide. Up close, I could see that her lips weren't just curled into a grin. They'd been carved into one. The skin around her mouth was torn, the edges raw and oozing. Her eyes, they were worse. They weren't human anymore. They were black voids, like staring into nothingness, like she wasn't even a person anymore, but some kind of hollow shell. I screamed and stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and crashing to the floor. The flashlight flew out of my hand and rolled across the room, its beam landing on the table where the man's body lay. His dead eyes seemed to be looking right at me now, as if he was silently pleading for help. The sound of footsteps broke through my panic, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy for someone as small as Rachel. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a piece of wood that had broken off one of the support beams. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. "Stay back!" I shouted, holding the makeshift weapon in front of me, like it would somehow stop her. But she didn't stop. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she tilted her head again, that hideous grin somehow widening even more. And then, in a voice that wasn't hers, a voice that was deep and guttural and filled with static, she said, "You were chosen." I swung the piece of wood as hard as I could, and it connected with her face. The impact was sickening, the sound of bone cracking against wood echoing through the room. She stumbled back, but instead of falling, she let out a sharp, distorted laugh. Her head snapped back into place, like it was on a hinge, the wound on her face already starting to close. "What the hell are you?" I screamed, my voice breaking. She didn't answer. Instead, she lunged at me, faster than anything I'd ever seen. I barely had time to react before she slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. Her hands wrapped around my neck, her nails digging into my skin. She was stronger than she should have been, her grip like iron, and I could feel the air being squeezed out of my lungs. I kicked and thrashed, my hands scrambling for anything to fight back with. My fingers found the flashlight, and I swung it upward, smashing it into her face. She let out a high-pitched screech and loosened her grip just enough for me to roll away. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the flashlight and bolted up the stairs, my legs burning with every step. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps loud and inhuman, like they were echoing from every direction at once. The air grew colder with each step I took, the darkness pressing in on me like a living thing. When I burst through the trapdoor and into the cabin, I slammed it shut behind me, dragging the dusty old rug back over it. Not that I thought it would stop her, but I had to do something. My chest was heaving, and every breath felt like fire. The cabin was deathly silent, except for the faint sound of wind howling outside. I ran for the front door, but when I reached it, it wouldn't budge. I pulled and yanked, but it was like the door had been welded shut. My phone. I remembered my phone and fumbled in my pocket to grab it. The screen was cracked, probably from the fall, but it still worked. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. The line connected, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But instead of hearing an operator, I heard her. "You can't leave," Rachel's distorted voice said through the phone. "It's too late. You're part of the game now." I threw the phone across the room in panic, and it shattered against the wall. The sound echoed, louder than it should have been, and the cabin seemed to shudder around me, like the walls themselves were alive. I turned to the window, desperate for a way out, but when I looked outside, I realized I wasn't in the woods anymore. The world beyond the glass was nothing but an endless swirling void, black and gray, like storm clouds trapped in a blender. There were no trees, no stars, no moon, just nothingness. I screamed. I screamed so loud, my throat felt like it was tearing, but the sound was swallowed by the void. The cabin was the only thing left, an island in a sea of nothing. And then I heard it, a low, rumbling laugh coming from behind me. I turned around, and the room was no longer empty. The man from the table was standing there, his chest still carved open, his ribs glistening with blood. His head was tilted to one side, his sewn-together smile stretched grotesquely wide. Rachel was next to him, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. And then there were others, dozens of them, men, women, children, all with those same black voids for eyes and those same carved grins. They filled the room, their bodies broken and twisted in ways that made my stomach churn. Some of them were missing limbs. Others had deep gashes that revealed bone, but none of them bled. They just stood there, staring at me, their heads tilting in unison. "You shouldn't have played," they said in one voice, a cacophony of whispers and growls. "The game doesn't end." I backed away, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. My hand found the door frame, and I pressed myself against it, desperately searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. The cabin was surrounded by nothingness, and these things had blocked every exit. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." Rachel stepped forward, her grin somehow even more unnatural. "You didn't know," she repeated mockingly. Her voice shifted with every word, switching between her own and that deep, guttural static. "But you chose, and now you're ours." Before I could respond, the room went dark again. The air grew heavier, colder, until it felt like I was being crushed from all sides. I could hear them moving around me, their footsteps circling, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. And then, one by one, they started laughing. The sound was unbearable, a mix of high-pitched giggles and deep, guttural cackles that seemed to burrow into my skull. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The laughter was inside my head, reverberating through every nerve in my body. "You're next," Rachel's voice whispered, right next to my ear. And then, something grabbed me. When something grabbed me, I expected pain. I expected claws digging into my flesh, sharp and brutal. But it wasn't like that. It was worse. It felt cold and soft, like dozens of hands wrapping around me all at once. I couldn't see them in the darkness, but I could feel their icy touch sliding over my arms, my legs, my face. They were pulling me, dragging me backward, deeper into the dark. I kicked and screamed, trying to break free, but it was like fighting against quicksand. The more I struggled, the tighter their grip became. My flashlight was gone, my phone was shattered, and the void was suffocating me. I couldn't even tell if I was still in the cabin anymore. It felt like I was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath me, and I was being pulled into an endless abyss. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the hands let go. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. The air smelled different now, cleaner, colder. I blinked, trying to adjust to the dim light that surrounded me, and realized I wasn't in the cabin anymore. I was outside, but not just anywhere. I was back in the snowy town square from the beginning of the simulation. The twinkling lights, the cheerful music, the fake snow. It was all there, just as perfect and picturesque as before. Except now, it felt wrong. The air was too still, the lights too bright, the music too distorted. It was like someone had taken a Christmas postcard and twisted it into something off. In the middle of the square, standing beneath a giant Christmas tree, was Santa. But it wasn't the same Santa I'd seen before. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was pale, almost skeletal, and his eyes burned with something primal and malicious. His suit was torn and stained, and in his hands he held a large burlap sack. The sack squirmed and wriggled like there was something alive inside. "You've made it to the final level," he said, his voice low and guttural. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. "What? What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out. He tilted his head, studying me, like I was some kind of bug he was deciding whether or not to squash. "It's not about what I want," he said. "It's about what you chose." "I didn't choose anything," I screamed. "I didn't know what this was. I didn't—" "You agreed," he interrupted, his voice booming now. "You signed, you played, and now you will finish." The sack in his hands writhed violently, and a muffled scream came from inside. My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. It was Rachel. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no. She's not. She's not supposed to be here. She didn't—" "Every choice has consequences," Santa said, his grin returning. "Yours just came early." He dumped the sack onto the ground, and Rachel spilled out. Her hands were bound, her mouth gagged, and her face was streaked with tears. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror, and tried to scream through the gag. "Let her go," I shouted, stumbling to my feet. "This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with this." Santa laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that made the ground beneath me vibrate. "Oh, but she does. She's your anchor, your connection. You brought her into the game, just like you brought yourself." I shook my head, desperate, panicking. "No, I didn't. I didn't bring her into anything." Santa raised an eyebrow, as if amused. "Did you answer her call?" he asked. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind flashed back to the simulation, to the moment when Rachel's call had come through, and I hadn't picked up. My chest tightened as the realization sunk in. "This is your chance," Santa said, his grin widening. "You can leave the game. You can wake up. All you have to do is choose." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Choose what?" He gestured to Rachel, who was sobbing now, her body trembling. "Her or you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. "If you choose her," Santa continued, "you take her place. You stay here, in the game, forever, but she goes free, back to the real world." My breath caught in my throat. "And if I choose me," I whispered. He tilted his head, his grin growing impossibly wide. "Then she stays, and the game starts again." I looked at Rachel, at the tears streaming down her face, the terror in her eyes. This wasn't fair. None of this was fair. I didn't even know how we'd gotten here, how any of this was possible. But I knew one thing. I couldn't leave her here. I couldn't let her suffer because of me. "I'll stay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let her go." Rachel screamed through the gag, shaking her head violently, but Santa didn't seem to care. He clapped his hands together, and the sound echoed like thunder. The world around us began to dissolve, the lights of the town square flickering and fading. "Done," he said, his voice cold and final. Rachel's body began to glow, a soft, golden light surrounding her. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and sorrow, and then she was gone. Just gone. The town square disappeared too, leaving me standing in a vast, empty void. Santa was still there, his grin never wavering. "Welcome to the game," he said. Before I could respond, the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell. I woke up in the cabin. The basement was gone. The forest was gone. The cabin wasn't dilapidated anymore. It was pristine, clean, like someone had just finished decorating it for Christmas. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and a plate of cookies sat on the table. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I was sitting in a chair, my arms and legs bound with thick ropes. My heart raced as I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was. That's when I saw the mirror. It was hanging on the wall across from me, and what I saw in the reflection made my blood run cold. It was me, but it wasn't. My face was pale and sunken, my eyes black voids, and my mouth was stretched into that same grotesque grin. The door to the cabin creaked open, and I saw someone step inside. It was Rachel. She looked confused, scared, just like I had when this all started. She spotted me, her eyes widening in shock. "Oh my God," she said. "What is this?" I tried to speak, to warn her, but no sound came out. My mouth just stayed frozen in that horrible, unnatural grin. Behind her, Santa stepped into the room, his smile as wide and sinister as ever. "Welcome to the game," he said, and then the door slammed shut. I found an EA Sports game on the dark web that simulates real-life events. The match results started happening in real life. Okay, so before I get into this, let me just say I'm not one of those tech genius types you see in movies hacking into government servers with 5 keystrokes. I'm just your average guy, mid-20s, part-time college student, part-time barista at a Starbucks. My idea of a crazy Friday night is ordering McDonald's delivery and binge watching old episodes of The Office. So, yeah, no one's calling me the next Elon Musk or anything. But, like everyone else, I've heard about the dark web. You know, that spooky corner of the internet people always say you should never visit unless you want the FBI knocking on your door. Or worse. I always thought the whole dark web thing was overhyped. Like, yeah, you could probably find some sketchy stuff, but it's not like you're gonna stumble across a cursed object that ruins your life, right? Wrong. South freaking wrong. A couple of weeks ago, I was hanging out in a Discord server with some online gaming buddies. We were swapping links to funny YouTube videos, TikToks, that kind of thing. Then one of them, this guy named Zeke, dropped a link and just said, "Don't click this unless you're ready for some wild-ish tea." Of course I clicked it. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Spoiler alert, a lot. The link took me to some random page that looked like it hadn't been updated since, like, 2002. It was super basic, just black text on a white background. There was no header, no footer, no ads, nothing. Just one line of text that said, "Download EA Sports Live Simulator Beta." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. I mean, come on, EA Sports? The company that can't even release a FIFA game without microtransactions? What were they doing on the dark web? But curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I downloaded the file. The weird thing was, the file wasn't some massive executable or anything. It was tiny, like maybe 5 megabytes tops. It downloaded almost instantly, and before I knew it, I was staring at an icon on my desktop, a pixelated EA Sports logo that looked like it was ripped straight out of the early 2000s. No splash screen, no loading bar, no terms and conditions to agree to. Just the logo and a single button that said play. Here's where things get weird. The moment I clicked play, my computer froze for a solid 30 seconds. I thought it had crashed or something, but then the screen went black, and a deep, mechanical voice said, "Welcome to EA Sports Live Simulator. Predict, watch, control." The menu that popped up was simple. 3 modes: predict, watch, and control. I figured predict was just your standard sports betting simulator, so I skipped that and went straight to watch. The game prompted me to enter 2 teams, a date, and a time. I typed in something random: Liverpool versus Chelsea, December 29th, 2024, 3 p.m. The game loaded for a second, then launched a hyper-realistic simulation of the match. And when I say hyper-realistic, I mean terrifyingly real. It didn't look like FIFA. It looked like someone had set up hidden cameras in an actual stadium. The players weren't generic character models. They were real people. I could see the sweat dripping off their faces, hear the crowd chanting, and even catch random details like the hot dog vendor in the stands arguing with a customer. It was insane. The match played out like a regular Premier League game. Liverpool scored in the first half. Chelsea equalized in the second, and then Liverpool clinched it with a penalty in the 89th minute. The final score was 2-1. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a creepy, over-the-top simulation, right? But then I noticed something. The game had opened a new tab in my browser without me even touching it. The tab was a live stream of some guy sitting in a bar somewhere in London wearing a Liverpool jersey. He was saying something like, "Man, I can't believe we're going to beat Chelsea tomorrow. 2-1. I'm calling it now." I'll admit, that freaked me out a little. Like, how did the game know I just watched a simulation where Liverpool beat Chelsea 2-1? But I brushed it off as some weird algorithm thing and went to bed. The next day, I woke up late and decided to kill some time scrolling through Twitter before heading to work. That's when I saw it. Liverpool defeats Chelsea 2-1 after last-minute penalty. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. I mean, soccer matches end with that score all the time, right? But then I started thinking about the simulation, the way the players moved, the exact timing of the goals, even the penalty kick. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. Like the game had played out the match before it even happened. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. So that night, I decided to mess around with the game some more. I went back to the watch mode and entered another random match. Kansas City Chiefs versus Green Bay Packers, January 1st, 2025, 8 p.m. Once again, the simulation was hyper-realistic, down to the way the players argued with the refs over a bad call. The final score was 24-21, with the Chiefs winning after a last-minute field goal. The next day, I checked ESPN. You can probably guess what happened. I started testing it with non-sports events. I put in random dates and locations. Times Square, New York City, January 15th, 2025, 7 p.m. The game showed a guy in a red hoodie dropping his phone, and a woman helping him pick it up. Harmless, right? Except 3 weeks later, a TikTok video went viral of a guy in Times Square dropping his phone at the exact same spot I'd seen in the game. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a game. It was something else. Something that could predict, or maybe even create, real-life events. And the worst part, I was only scratching the surface. After that whole Times Square thing, I decided I needed to stop messing with this game. Like, no more testing, no more curiosity. Just delete it and pretend it never existed. But here's the thing. Once you realize something like this exists, it doesn't just disappear from your mind. It's like seeing the monster under your bed and then trying to sleep like it's not still there. It doesn't work. I spent the next few days going about my routine, making lattes, smiling at customers, pretending I wasn't freaking out on the inside. But the more I tried to ignore the game, the more it started creeping into my thoughts. What was it? How did it work? Why did I still have it? And most importantly, what else could it do? One night, I caved. I pulled out my laptop, reopened the game, and stared at the menu. Predict didn't interest me. Whatever that was, it sounded like gambling on steroids. Watch was tempting, but I already knew what it could do. And honestly, the idea of watching more real-life events unfold before they happened just felt wrong. Like I was spying on people or something. But control. That one had been bothering me since the beginning. The word itself gave me chills. Control what? It didn't exactly scream fun minigame. Still, I hovered over the button for what felt like an eternity before finally clicking it. The screen flickered for a moment, and then it loaded something that made my stomach drop. A list of names. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, scrolling endlessly down the screen. Each name had a small profile picture next to it, like what you'd see on Facebook or Instagram. Some were smiling selfies, others were more casual shots, like people at a barbecue or on vacation. Underneath each name were 3 options: track, influence, eliminate. Yeah, you read that right. Eliminate. At first, I thought it was fake, like some edgy prank or an over-the-top ARG, alternate reality game. But then I clicked on one of the profiles, just out of morbid curiosity. It was a guy named Matthew Collins. He looked like your average dude, mid-30s, button-down shirt, the kind of guy you'd see working a corporate 9-to-5 job. When I clicked his name, the screen brought up an insane amount of information. His home address, work address, social media profiles, even his recent text messages. It didn't stop there. The screen showed a live feed of what he was doing at that exact moment. He was sitting in a Starbucks, typing something on his laptop. The camera angle was weird, like it was coming from inside his computer screen. I could see the reflection of the coffee shop behind him, even hear the faint sound of baristas calling out orders in the background. My heart was racing so hard, I thought it might explode. That's when I realized this wasn't just a game. It was something bigger, something I wasn't supposed to have access to. And the worst part, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some kind of line just by looking at Matthew's profile. But the options at the bottom of the screen were staring me in the face. Track, influence, eliminate. I knew I should just close the laptop and walk away, but it was like some invisible force was holding me in place. I clicked track. The screen updated instantly. A map popped up, showing Matthew's exact location in real time. It was detailed to the point of being nauseating. I could see the layout of the Starbucks, the parking lot outside, even the street he'd have to cross to get home. A timeline appeared at the bottom of the screen, showing predictions for where he'd go next. Leave Starbucks at 9:15 p.m. Walk to parking lot. Drive home. Arrive at 9:45 p.m. And the worst part? It was accurate. I watched the little dot representing Matthew move exactly as predicted, down to the second. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe for the game to be wrong, or for Matthew to somehow deviate from the plan. But he didn't. He moved like he was on a leash, following some invisible script. By the time he got home, I was shaking. This wasn't just creepy anymore. It was dangerous. And yet, for reasons I can't even explain, I wasn't done. I clicked back to Matthew's profile and hovered over the influence option. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to see if it even worked. Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that this whole thing was fake. Either way, I clicked it. A new screen popped up with a single prompt: enter command. I stared at the blinking cursor for what felt like hours, my mind racing. What was I supposed to type? Jump up and down? Order a pizza? I typed something simple. Wave your hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, on the live feed, Matthew raised his hand and gave a small, awkward wave, like he was swatting at a fly or saying hi to someone in another room. My stomach dropped. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or horrified. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a glitch. It was real. This is where things went off the rails. I should have stopped there. I should have closed the game, wiped my hard drive, thrown my laptop into a river. Something. But instead, I kept going. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the rush of power, or maybe I just wanted to see how far it could go. I clicked eliminate. A warning popped up on the screen. Are you sure you want to proceed? This action cannot be undone. I didn't even hesitate. I clicked yes. The game immediately switched to a new view. A live feed from what looked like a drone camera hovering above Matthew's house. It zoomed in on his living room window, where I could see him sitting on his couch, scrolling through his phone. Then, out of nowhere, the screen started flashing red, and the words "Operation Commencing" appeared in bold, blocky letters. I thought it was some kind of glitch or fake out, but then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving through the backyard. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was dressed in all black, moving with an eerie precision, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Within seconds, they were inside the house. The live feed cut out before I could see what happened next, but the aftermath was all over the news the next morning. Local man found dead in apparent home invasion. The details were vague, but they didn't need to be. I already knew what had happened. I'd pressed the button. I'd set it all in motion. Now, I can't stop thinking about that list of names. Were they random? Were they people who had somehow pissed off the wrong person? Or were they just like me, idiots who downloaded something they shouldn't have? The game's still on my laptop. I haven't opened it since that night, but I can feel it sitting there, like a loaded gun waiting to go off. Every time I close my eyes, I see Matthew's face, hear that awful mechanical voice in my head. Predict. Watch. Control. I don't know what to do. If I delete it, will that stop it? Or will it just find someone else? And if I keep it, what happens when curiosity gets the better of me again? All I know is this. I've seen what it can do, and I don't think it's just a game anymore. For the next week, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I mean, how do you even process something like that? I'd essentially ordered a hit on someone. Me, a guy who gets winded walking up a flight of stairs. I wasn't some mob boss or shadowy government agent. I was just me. And yet, somehow, with a couple of clicks, I'd ruined someone's life. Ended it. But here's the thing. The guilt didn't stick around as long as I thought it would. Don't get me wrong. It was there, gnawing at the back of my mind, but it was like a storm cloud that would roll in and out. The curiosity, though, that never went away. If anything, it got worse. Every time I opened my laptop, I felt the game pulling at me, like it was alive, whispering in my ear, "Come back, there's more to see." I tried to fight it. I really did. But one night, after a particularly long shift at Starbucks, I caved. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything crazy. I just wanted to look. Just a quick peek, and then I'd delete it for good. So, I opened the game. The menu hadn't changed. Predict, watch, control. I hovered over control for a moment, my finger trembling above the trackpad, but I couldn't bring myself to click it. Not yet. Instead, I went back to watch. I figured it was the safest option. No decisions to make, no guilt to carry. Just passive observation. Right? This time, I typed in something random. San Francisco, Pier 39, February 5th, 2025, 4 p.m. The screen loaded, and once again, it felt like I was watching a live feed. The camera panned over the pier, capturing tourists snapping selfies, street performers juggling fire, seagulls stealing fries off tables. It was so mundane, so harmless, that I actually started to relax. And then I saw him, a man in his late 40s, dressed in a navy blue hoodie and jeans, standing at the edge of the pier. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just leaning against the railing, staring out at the water. But something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, or the way his hands fidgeted with the zipper of his hoodie. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. That's when the camera zoomed in on him, unprompted. I wasn't touching the controls. It just happened. The game seemed to be focusing on him, singling him out from the crowd. A name popped up at the bottom of the screen. Michael Anderson. I recognized the name immediately. He was on the list. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I clicked out of watch and went straight to control. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely navigate the interface, but I managed to find Michael's profile. Just like before, it was packed with information. His home address, work address, recent purchases, even the time he'd last checked his email. The options were the same: track, influence, eliminate. I hovered over track for a moment, then skipped straight to influence. My breathing was shallow, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. A familiar prompt appeared on the screen. Enter command. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was I even trying to do? Prove that I could. Satisfy some sick curiosity. I typed the first thing that came to mind. Drop your phone. The screen updated instantly, switching back to the live feed of Pier 39. Michael looked down at his hand, as if surprised by something, and then, without warning, his phone slipped from his grip and clattered onto the wooden planks. He bent down to pick it up, his movements stiff and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just creepy anymore. It was horrifying. I could feel the weight of what I was doing, the realization that I was changing things, steering real-life events like I was God or something. And yet, I couldn't stop. That's when I noticed something new. a flashing icon in the corner of the screen. It looked like an envelope, like an old-school email notification. I clicked it, and a message popped up. Would you like to unlock advanced features? I froze. Advanced features? What the hell did that mean? Against my better judgment, I clicked yes. The screen went dark for a moment, and then a new menu appeared. It was more streamlined than before, sleek, black, and red, with a single option in the center of the screen, Scenario Builder. Beneath it, in smaller text, was a description. Create custom scenarios, test limits, redefine reality. My hands were sweating so badly, I thought my laptop might slip off the desk, but I clicked it anyway. The Scenario Builder interface was simple, almost elegant. It let me input locations, dates, times, and, here's the kicker, actions. I could script entire events, down to the tiniest detail. I started small. I chose a random park in Chicago and scripted a scene where a guy would trip over his shoelaces and spill his coffee. It worked perfectly. The game showed me a live feed of the park, and sure enough, at the exact time I'd set, some poor dude in a Cubs hat tripped and spilled his latte all over his pants. It was almost comical, in a deeply unsettling way. But then I got bolder. I don't even want to admit the things I tested next. Let's just say it escalated quickly. A car accident here, a public argument there. Nothing major, nothing deadly, but enough to make me realize just how much power I had. And the worst part, it felt good. There's something about playing Puppet Master, about bending reality to your will, that's intoxicating in the worst way. But then I made a mistake. I decided to script something bigger. I chose a random shopping mall in Houston and set up a scenario where two strangers would bump into each other, argue, and eventually get into a physical fight. It seemed harmless enough. Just some harmless chaos for my own sick amusement. Except the fight didn't stay harmless. One of the men pulled out a knife. I watched in horror as the live feed captured every second of the scene. The man stabbed the other guy twice, right there in the middle of the food court, before running off into the crowd. People were screaming, panicking, knocking over tables and chairs as they scrambled for the exits. The victim collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around him as bystanders tried to help. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry, my hands shaking. I hadn't scripted that. I just told the game to make them fight. The knife, the stabbing, that wasn't me. Was it? Another notification popped up. Scenario complete. Would you like to save this template? I slammed my laptop shut so hard, I thought I might break it. My heart was pounding, my chest tight. What the hell had I done? What was I even dealing with? The next day, the mall stabbing was all over the news. They showed surveillance footage of the suspect running away, the victim being wheeled out on a stretcher. The anchor said the man was in critical condition. That was supposed to make me feel better, that he wasn't dead, but it didn't. It just made me feel worse, because now I knew. The game didn't just simulate reality, it changed it. It manipulated people, twisted events, pushed things to their breaking point. And I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a participant, a creator. And that scared me more than anything. After the mall stabbing, I told myself I was done. No more testing, no more curiosity, nothing. I was shutting it down for good. I even looked up tutorials on how to wipe my laptop, how to nuke the hard drive completely. But every time I got close to actually doing it, something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was something worse. Addiction. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but the game had its hooks in me, deep, It wasn't long before the notification started. At first, I thought it was just some system glitch. Random pings would pop up in the corner of my screen, even when the game wasn't open. They were subtle, almost easy to miss. Just a small icon flashing for a second before disappearing. But then the messages started. The first one popped up while I was scrolling through Twitter late at night. It was just 3 words. Check the game. I froze. My stomach felt like it had dropped straight into my feet. I stared at the screen, half expecting it to vanish, like the other notifications, but it didn't. It stayed there, blinking at me, like a neon sign in the darkness. I tried ignoring it, but another message appeared a few seconds later. You're wasting time. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I wanted to close my laptop, throw it out the window, something, but my hands wouldn't stop moving. It was like they had a mind of their own. Before I knew it, I was back on the game's menu. This time, it looked different. The sleek black and red design from before was gone, replaced by something darker, more menacing. The menu options were still there. Predict, watch, control. But now there was a 4th option at the bottom of the screen. Play. I didn't want to click it. Every bone in my body was screaming at me to shut the laptop and run, but I couldn't. My finger moved to the trackpad like it was being dragged, and before I knew it, I'd clicked. The screen went black for a few seconds, and then the words, "Scenario active," appeared in blood-red text. A new live feed popped up, showing a dark alleyway somewhere I didn't recognize. The camera angle was weird, like it was mounted on a street lamp, or a drone hovering above the scene. The alley was empty, except for a single figure standing near the entrance. A woman in her late 20s, wearing a denim jacket and holding her phone. My first thought was that it was just another random scenario, something the game had queued up for me to watch. But then I saw the text at the bottom of the screen. Player objective. Assist. Assist? Assist what? I didn't understand what it meant until the second figure appeared. He stepped out of the shadow slowly, like he wanted to be seen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black hoodie pulled up over his head. Something about him set me on edge immediately. It wasn't just the way he moved. It was the way the woman reacted. She froze the second she saw him, her body stiffening like a deer in headlights. The man started walking toward her, his hands stuffed casually into the pockets of his hoodie. The woman glanced around, clearly panicking, but the alley was empty. There was nowhere for her to go. And then the game prompted me. Assist target. Approve action. A pop-up appeared on the screen, showing 2 options, yes or no. I didn't know what approving the action meant, but I wasn't about to find out. I slammed my finger on no, my breathing ragged. The man stopped in his tracks. For a moment, I thought I'd done it. I thought I'd saved her. But then the game prompted me again. Override action? Y or N? I didn't touch anything. I sat there paralyzed as the man started moving again, this time faster. The woman turned and ran, but she didn't get far. He caught up to her in seconds, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her back toward the shadows. No, I whispered, my voice cracking. No, no, no. Another prompt appeared. Eliminate witness? Y or N? I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as tears filled my eyes. I didn't want to press it. I didn't want to play anymore. But the game wouldn't let me quit. The screen kept flashing, demanding a response. YN, YN, YN. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely move the cursor, but eventually I clicked Y. The screen flickered again, and the live feed cut out. All that was left was a single message. Scenario complete. You have unlocked Tier 2 privileges. I slammed the laptop shut and shoved it under my bed, like that would somehow make it go away. But the damage was done. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that alleyway, that woman's face, the way she'd looked over her shoulder right before the screen went black. I spent the next day in a fog, barely functioning. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't carry a conversation without zoning out. I felt like I was losing my mind. And then, when I got home, I made the mistake of turning on the news. The top story. Young woman found dead in local alleyway. The reporter described the scene in chilling detail. The woman had been strangled, her body left in the shadows until a passerby found her the next morning. No suspects, no leads, just another random act of violence in a world full of chaos. Except it wasn't random. I knew that. I'd seen it happen. I'd made it happen. For the next few days, I avoided my laptop like it was cursed, which, let's be real, it probably was. But the game didn't let me off that easy. The notifications started again, this time more aggressive. Every time I turned on my computer, there it was. New scenario available. Play now. I couldn't escape it. It was like the game had taken on a life of its own, refusing to let me go. And then, one night, it escalated. I was sitting in my living room, trying to distract myself with some mindless Netflix show, when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The message was simple. Check your laptop. My blood ran cold. I tried to ignore it, but the texts kept coming, one after another. Don't make me ask again. You're wasting time. We're watching. That last one made me snap. I grabbed my laptop and threw it onto the coffee table, flipping it open with shaking hands. The game was already running. The screen was black, except for a single message in the center. Your actions have consequences. And then the live feed started. This time, it wasn't a random location or stranger. It was my apartment. The camera angle was from outside my window, looking in. I could see myself on the screen, sitting on the couch, staring at the laptop with wide, terrified eyes. Another message popped up. Scenario active. Before I could react, the feed switched to a different angle. This time, from the hallway outside my door. A figure was standing there, dressed in black, their face obscured by a mask. They reached into their pocket and pulled out a key. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I grabbed my phone and ran out the back door, sprinting into the night like my life depended on it. Because it did. I'm writing this from a motel on the outskirts of town. I don't know who to call, who to trust, or even what to do next. All I know is this. The game isn't just a game. It's something bigger, something darker, something I never should have touched. And now it's playing me. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside the motel made me jump. Footsteps, distant car engines, even the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. I was convinced someone or something was coming for me. I didn't know if it was the masked figure from my apartment, the game itself, or some unseen force that I'd accidentally unleashed. All I knew was that I wasn't safe. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I was going to destroy the laptop. No half measures this time. No wiping the hard drive or uninstalling the game. I was going to smash it to pieces and throw the remains into a dumpster somewhere far, far away. Maybe it wouldn't solve the problem, but at least it'd be a start. I packed up my things, grabbed the laptop, and headed out. There was a scrapyard about an hour's drive from the motel, and I figured that was as good a place as any to get rid of it. The whole way there, I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting the screen to light up, or the game to start speaking to me in that awful mechanical voice. But it didn't. The laptop just sat there, silent like it was waiting. When I got to the scrapyard, I wasted no time. I found a rusted metal table near the edge of the lot, grabbed a sledgehammer from a pile of tools, and swung with everything I had. The first hit cracked the screen. The second shattered it completely, sending shards of glass flying in all directions. I didn't stop until the laptop was nothing more than a twisted, mangled heap of metal and plastic. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny glimmer of hope. I scooped up the remains, dumped them into a nearby barrel, and walked away without looking back. It was over. It had to be over. It wasn't over. That night, I checked into a new motel, one even farther from home, and collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. I'd barely closed my eyes when my phone buzzed. I thought about ignoring it, but something told me I needed to look. The message was from the same unknown number as before. 4 words, simple and chilling. You didn't finish it. I sat up, my chest tightening. How? How was this still happening? I destroyed the laptop. It was gone. There was no way the game could still be active. Unless it wasn't just on the laptop. Another message came through. 1 last level. Play now. My phone vibrated again, this time with a link. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to delete it, throw my phone against the wall, do anything except click it. But deep down, I knew I didn't have a choice. If I didn't open it, it wouldn't stop. It would never stop. So I clicked. The link opened a browser window, but instead of the familiar black and red menu, it was just a blank screen with a single line of text. Final scenario, you. Before I could react, the screen flickered, and suddenly I was looking at a live feed of my motel room. The angle was from the ceiling corner, like a security camera. I could see myself sitting on the bed, holding my phone, my face pale and drenched in sweat. The text at the bottom of the screen read, "Player objective, survive." My blood turned to ice. The feed switched to a new angle, showing the motel parking lot. A car had just pulled in, a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. It was the same masked man I'd seen in the live feed from my apartment. Another message popped up on my phone. "He's coming." I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. What the hell was I supposed to do? Call the cops? Run? Hide? Before I could decide, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was slow, deliberate. 3 loud, echoing bangs. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the cheap wood of the door. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a metal lamp from the nightstand, and backed into the corner of the room. My phone vibrated again. Another message. "Open the door." "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. "No, I'm not doing this." The knock turned into pounding. The door shook violently, the hinges groaning under the force. I could hear the sound of metal scraping against metal, like a key being forced into the lock. My phone buzzed one more time. "You can't run." The lock clicked. The door swung open, and the masked man stepped inside. He was taller than I remembered, his presence filling the small room like a storm cloud. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The way he moved, the slow, deliberate steps, the way his head tilted slightly as if he were studying me. It was enough to paralyze me with fear. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. The blade caught the light, gleaming like it had been freshly sharpened. I gripped the lamp tighter, my hands slick with sweat. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I could feel my legs trembling beneath me. And then, without warning, he lunged. I swung the lamp with everything I had, connecting with the side of his head. He stumbled back, but it didn't slow him down. He came at me again, faster this time, slashing wildly with the knife. I ducked, the blade narrowly missing my face, and threw the lamp at him. It hit him square in the chest, but he barely flinched. I grabbed the chair from the desk and shoved it at him, trying to put some distance between us. He grabbed it with one hand and flung it across the room like it was made of cardboard. I backed into the corner, my mind racing for a way out. The window. It was my only chance. I ran for it, grabbing the TV remote off the dresser and hurling it at him as a distraction. He dodged it easily, but it gave me just enough time to yank the window open and climb through. I hit the ground hard, scraping my hands and knees on the asphalt, and took off running. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block, my lungs burning and my legs ready to give out. I ducked into an alleyway and pressed myself against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed again. "You can't escape." I looked up and saw the black sedan idling at the end of the street. The masked man was standing beside it, watching me. He didn't chase me. He didn't need to. He just stood there, knife in hand, like he knew I'd come back. Another message appeared. Final scenario complete. Game over. The screen went black. I don't know how I got out of that alley. I don't even remember running. All I know is that I ended up in a different city, in a different motel, with no phone, no laptop, and no idea what to do next. The game is gone now. At least I think it is. But I still feel like I'm being watched, like every move I make is being tracked. Maybe it's paranoia, or maybe it's just the next level. Because here's the thing, games don't just end. Not really. They stay with you, waiting for the next player to press start. And if you're reading this, maybe that player is you.